we hack the code and flip the tag. Where cliches come to retire. Drop that beat, turn down to fire. Say what's real, make fears take a seat. Unconventional wisdom, dancing on your feet. Hey.
Hello, and welcome to Unconventional Wisdom about conventional wisdom. I'm your host, Kim Miller-Hershon, and I am so happy to introduce you today to Kurt Uhlir, who is my guest. And let me just tell you a little bit about Kurt. Kurt is a CMO and is known as the king of scaling companies. He's a GTM architect and a growth operator, and he's helped lead over 60 acquisitions and exits, supported an $880 million IPO, and scaled multiple companies through hypergrowth. I am so happy to welcome Kurt today. I know he's going to have tons of advice and wisdom and some great stories. So, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Excellent. Okay. So I always ask a random question to begin with. And my random question for you is, do you have any unusual hobby?
One of my most unusual hobbies is something I used to do that my wife and I have a different risk tolerance of, so I do not do this very much anymore, but I'm a certified alligator handler. So I can handle anything up to about a 550-pound alligator by myself that usually is about 8 to 8.5 foot.
And we all need to know, how did you get into alligator wrangling?
I was raised by father with some rather extreme hobbies. That did start it. So I've always been kind of a little bit of adrenaline junkie, looking for that dopamine hit. But I met a gentleman in a bar in Chicago when I was living there that moonlighted doing stunt work and teaching men and women how to do stunt work, and started teaching them how to do rigging and working alongside of them. And as part of that, I found a way I could go get certified in alligator handling. And it seemed like a fun thing to do that not too many people that were in the stunt world would be able to say that they had done. And now it definitely complements things like I do a lot of propagating of plants and things in my backyard, which is a very different risk tolerance. So it complements each other very well.
Oh, that is the most unusual analogy I think I have ever heard, compliment. But that's a great beginning of a story, right? I met a guy in a bar, right? Oh man, I love that. So you got certified. So I'm assuming that you did a fair amount of actually working with alligators.
A good bit. If you search for my name and like alligators, you'll find quite a few pictures that show up online, including the very first large alligator I pulled out, which I did have a team with that. He was about a 10.5 foot one, was also named Kurt. We went into this large pond with 30 alligators, and the one I pulled out happened to be missing a toe. And so the coach or instructor was like, Kurt, you pulled out Kurt. And so I'm on top of him pulling him back as part of actually, he needed some medical treatment.
Wow. Unbelievable. I think we can all say we are glad that your wife has less tolerance so that we will know you for many years to come.
Thank you for that. It's controlled risk. It's not that much different than being in a boardroom where you want to know what the outcome's going to be when you bring up a new topic or do something.
There you go. Yeah. Oh, that's very funny. Okay, so Kurt, you've obviously, I guess the other part of the introduction, you're a chief marketing officer, right? CMO, and you've obviously been in a lot of different organizations. So you have a lot of leadership experience. And I think that's what we want to tap into today. And also, I think your journey to get where you've been. So let's start with, what did you think success was going to look like? What's a young alligator called? Just a baby alligator? Does it have a
I think
name?
so. I don't know if there's a different
Oh,
name for it.
really? Because those were too small for you to have to wrangle. Growing up, what did you think success was going to look like according to the conventional wisdom? And then what did you realize that just was not going to work for you?
I thought success, especially at the leadership level, is going to be that you were the person in the room that would have the strategy fully figured out, that you could not show uncertainty or things that you were
Right,
questioning because it would weaken your authority. And so that's what I
right.
thought it was going to look like. Very different than both what that ended up making my teams become that I didn't intend for them to become, and then what I had to change to work through that as well.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I've talked about this before, how sometimes I actually am really good on the big things, like on the big strategic things. I don't believe in fake it till you make it. I agree with you 100%. This idea that somehow, as the leader, you have to have all the answers. If you did, why would you need anybody else?
Right.
But you know what? Sometimes I find myself doing, which I'm really like mindfully trying not to do, and I'm curious if this ever comes up for you, is that somebody will, like, for instance, in a non-important conversation, make a reference to maybe a book or a quote or something in history or a cultural reference. And I find myself nodding my head. And then I'm just like, wait a second, I have no idea what this person is talking about.
Right.
Yeah. And it's,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I know. Yeah, I've done that as well, as opposed to stepping back and being like, no, actually, I haven't heard of that, or tell me more about that, or what was impactful about that for you.
And on the one hand, it's trivial, right? But on the other hand, I just feel like I don't want to be saying yes to something that I actually have no idea what you're talking about. And I'm trying to get better in the moment at saying, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. But I like the way you phrased it, because then you really sound much smarter.
There's that, and also like when you show up that way as somebody who acts like they figured something out, and even at the strategy level, I'll step into companies that are 50 million, $75 million a year in recurring revenue, and their CEO might actually think they have everything figured out, and like they're hiring somebody like me to go grow the company. And what they actually don't want to hear, but is the reality, is they do not actually have a huge bit of things figured out. They have a lot figured out, which is why they were able to grow that level. But there's a huge bit of rebuilding that usually has to happen. When I
Yeah,
go and listen to the sales teams, like who they're selling to and how they respond often doesn't match their marketing. And so when you show up as the leader who's like, I have this all figured out, you end up with you default into authoritative leadership, or people push you to that. You
right,
high capacity people end up leaving, or they just stop pushing back, which is not what you want. They're truly smart people. Customer
right,
insight goes out the door, and only the positive stuff filters up to the leadership and none of the negative stuff, which means you can't actually come back and manage a team. Like you might have been right at the strategy early on, but if they're not telling you where the gaps are and the problems, you cannot continue to be right on strategy because you do not actually understand what's
right.
going on.
Right. And I think the other thing that happens, which is the reason why they bring you in, is that they block their own growth because they keep doing things the same way. And where it might have worked to a certain level, there's a point at which you need new strategy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so much of that comes from, I just think about it in terms of there is that information flow. And so no matter where you're at, especially as your teams get larger, your company become bigger, like even the leaders that are truly trying to micromanage, if I actually step and look at things, like they actually see maybe like less than a fraction of 1% of the decisions that are actually going on. They think they know what's going on and they
Right.
think they're micromanaging, but because the moment you have two or three layers of people or 30 layers within an organization, like the decisions that are impacting a customer, like you might be seeing 1/10 of 1/10 of a percent of the things that are going on. Now, maybe those are some big things still, but what's going day to day in the life of a company, you don't actually know. And so without that information flow coming up, there's no way to actually understand that. And thankfully, I got insight to that early on in my life by having somebody that had been in a much larger organization come in with some different ways to sidestep all of that because he knew how information was going to flow. And he was like, I need to have ground truth reality so that I can make decisions and strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just in general, having mentors, sitting back and really watching the way that other people do things or think about things, especially people who can do things and think about things differently than you do, I think can be unbelievably helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. As a successful leader, and obviously you've had a lot of success, what's one thing that people assume that you've got totally figured out, but behind the scenes you still wrestle with?
I think one of the big things for me then is that just because you've scaled companies repeatedly like I have, they think decision making becomes easy, when in fact, decision making actually becomes harder and harder for me. there's when you scaled things across, especially across industries and size companies, there is a muscle memory that just feels natural when things are flowing well and they're scaling. So pattern recognition improves, and you can see around corners faster. But in that reality, at every stage, there's new constraints. Technology's changing, especially if we think about AI now. Market expectations are evolving. Some cases for the worse. Like I speak to more private equity partners and VCs now that like what they think reality looks like does not match at all with what's actually going on within their organization or others. And it's because that capital dynamics are changing. And so
Right.
that's what I thought things were going to look like. And the decision making would become a lot easier when in fact decision making has become a lot harder, actually, I think, as I've moved forward through time for a variety of reasons.
And in terms of marketing, I think expectations are changing. Do you think that what success looks like the metrics that you look at for success, are those consistent even now, or are those changing over time, do you think?
It often depends on who the money is behind the company. And I just say that in terms of there's always a need, whether it's a public company or a VC or a private equity backed company, there's always a need to deliver on the very short term, that 2 to 12 months. And there's nothing wrong with organizations where they have a capital return. So if it's later stage in a fund that's written a check, they have a certain time frame when they have to start giving returns back to their investors. Others will act a little bit more like a family office. And so you need to know, are you the first check from the funders that have come in? So do you have 7 years, or are they already 3 or 4 years in and they need to do a return in 2 or 3 years? Or is this an organization where they will hold the winners as long as they're going to keep growing? Because that depends on what I'm going to look at from a marketing perspective and go to market. And
Mm,
so I'm going to look at things if we have to do a return and an exit in the next 18 to 24 months, we're going to be hyper focused on just the 2 to 12 month revenue and all the
right.
really lagging indicators, very few leading. If on the other hand, they're on the earlier stage, then we're going to start talking about allocating things that are going to return maybe if it's only 10%, 20% of my budget on like the 12 months to 36-month time frame or 36 months plus, at which point I'm going to care more about leading indicators. And so there's a lot of that. But even on the short term, especially on in the business to business world right now, like it's a little bit more focused on contribution and having to do some research afterwards because search engine numbers don't matter as much and organic traffic. And like people maybe I'm in companies now where people are coming in and writing $300,000 checks, and almost the entire funnel has taken place with them discussing with Perplexity or ChatGPT or Claude before they ever spoke to a salesperson. And the salesperson's still much more than an order taker, but like they're almost at that point working through onboarding conversations than they are any part of a sales process.
Yeah. That is so funny that you say that. I have a client right now who's a GC, right? General counsel for a company. And we were chatting recently that she was having like a text fight with the COO. He was questioning her legal advice
Yeah.
through Chat GPT. And it was infuriating for her. And she actually just texted me today to say that they consulted their outside lawyers and she was right about everything. So there you go. But I think on the one hand, it makes like prospective buyers much more sophisticated, much more well informed, but also potentially misinformed.
Yeah, I think the thing, especially on the go-to-market side or sales or anything else, is being curious. Like that's a place everybody should be at the approach. Is like I've been very successful in some companies. We talked about in the intro. Like I've been part of two hypergrowth companies that we take from tens of millions a year in revenue to $1 billion plus of revenue. And so, am I right about a lot of things? Yes, but I'm also keenly aware that I might be wrong. And just because something's worked well 12 times in the past across multiple industries, things might be different right now for some reason. So
Right.
I'm going to come in with a strong opinion, but if either a peer or even an individual contributor on my team has a very different opinion, I want to know why. I wouldn't have a problem if they're misinformed and they're questioning Perplexity to try to talk through something. But is that because I haven't explained it well enough that they actually believe me? Or is it that they're trying to understand or they're trying to broaden their scope? I need to know the why behind were you even looking through this? Or just are you looking for gaps? There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. And I am all about asking better questions.
Right.
And I love that you can look at that and not feel defensive. Or maybe you feel defensive and you don't act on it. That would be me. But you get underneath it and ask the why questions, because I think though that's really where the information is.
Absolutely. And some of that just comes through as well as the in the day-to-day operations for how people are setting up. Like even on the legal side, we'll stay with the general counsel. I know quite a few general counsels. My brother-in-law is a lawyer. There's both things that are very repeatable, but in the old day that may have been templates that they were using, but there's also a lot more that they're changing now. And so I like to look at it. It actually becomes increasingly this case as companies grow is that like my role as a chief marketing officer is to actually question everything. And so, like for now, I often give advice to CEOs and funds when they're looking to hire somebody new. And I'm like, you can no longer have a CMO who's just a strategy person or is coming up with things. They have to be a practitioner of the marketing automation tools of the AI.
Mm,
And like, what does that look like in reality? It means that they spend 80% of their organization's time just on SOPs that are just cranking through stuff that's repeatable, that they know work. Some of it was there when they came in, but they're spending 85% of their time being a mad scientist, being a practitioner, doing things with a small group, trying to put the rest of the team out of work figuratively, because if you figure it out, we're going to fundamentally change what you're doing. And so if that's the approach you take, and I know general counsels that are checking their way, hey, we have outside counsel, we have in-house lawyers. How can we bring in AI? And so the general counsels are showing up to the board meetings and the big girl, big boy meetings that they should be, but they're spending so much of their time seeing how far they can actually test AI tools and use things and fundamentally change it.
right.
So they're curious by nature to be the best at who they are now.
Good. Yeah, those are really great things. With all of this in mind, if you could rewrite the rule book on leadership, what's one outdated belief that you'd throw out and what would you replace it with?
Ooh, I'm going to say something that, especially for any CEOs or like board members, they're going to hate hearing, especially for their senior leaders, but they're not hiring people for a specific role anymore. And so I used to think, and I still write job description, but that you're hiring somebody, whether individual contributor or leader, to execute tasks tied to a role and tied to a role, as opposed to you should actually be hiring people to reach a business outcome tied to value creation. And yes, they need to do a specific role. You're not bringing in chaos. You're not bringing in a CMO just to, hey, just go do stuff and grow the company. But it's not reckless innovation, but you're bringing in somebody that you may have a strong opinion and you want them to run quickly with what has been working, but to you're not hiring the CMO to send out emails or do social media or write case studies. You're hiring them to reach business outcomes, of which things may drastically change from what you think it's going to be.
I love that. Because the other thing that I think of, like, I work with a lot of founders and CEOs of smaller businesses. And I think one thing that they get very caught in is doing what they've always done,
Right.
right? Because they've gotten their businesses to a certain level of success. And it's so interesting to coach people who are already super successful, who have a stated goal of getting to the next level, but also have to give up a lot of what they've like their job description. In other words, like in the end of the day, they need a new job. They need to give themselves a new job to get to the business outcomes that they want. And I think it's very hard to get yourself out of. These are the things I did to get my business to the level of success that it's at. Like I'm there to question everything, which is a lot of what you're talking about too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think especially for your audience and who you often work with, companies that are 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, maybe even 15 million in revenue, it's actually easier for them to do this once they start to realize that than companies that are larger. And
Yeah.
so what I want people to hear is like, I'll step into companies that are 50 million, 75 million, sometimes even 150 million a year in revenue. And when I get in there, what I figure out is they don't actually understand their ideal customer profile. They do not actually understand the customer pain points. If I go to the people on their product team or even their sales team and I go, what's the line item in your customer's budget? What's it called where they pay for this product or service that you all offer? They are almost always like they were good enough to get to the level they're at. You're a $50 million company, a $150 million company. You had a lot of success, but they do not have it dialed in to your point of what it would take to become a $300 million
That's
company.
right.
But because they have so much success, it's really hard a lot of times for the CEOs or the boards to hear that. But if you're a $2 million company, $5 million company, you know how much opportunity there is to grow. And so when you know that those people don't have it figured out, that's what the reality is when I step in and see it. It's okay that you don't have it figured out, and you should really be questioning that much more. Data is going to be fragmented. You need to know these things, and you have to approach it differently. To your point, what you've done before to get here is not going to be the same thing to grow since there. And hey, you may have just walked out of a successful customer meeting, but just because they closed doesn't mean that you actually understand why.
Very much. So, what's one unconventional habit or mindset shift that's helped you get to the level that you're currently at?
That when you hire people, even if you've hired really successful people, you may have a good culture. I speak a lot about servant leadership. So even if you're a servant leader versus an authoritative leader, the people you are hiring have scars from previous leadership. So it's like parents or like spouse partner relationships. And no matter who they are, like with me, I've had those relationships and those things come up. So something's going to happen at the company or with you. And so it's going to expose that PTSD that I have from that crappy boss. Like I've worked at public companies where on the website and you see the public persona from the people that says, we hire smart people and we trust them to do wise things. No, in reality, they're micromanagers and they question things. And they're some of the worst leaders I've ever hired. Now, not all of them. I've worked for some great people, but that's going to come up. And so the unconventional thing is no matter who you are, you have to realize you might trigger that in me or trigger that in people on your team. And so you do have to not just be curious, but you have to realize that how you show up impacts them. And it may change from moment to moment. It may change
Right.
because they're hungry or they're tired or they're angry or something like that. Or it may have been because, hey, you approach them in front of the whole team and they would have rather had the harsh confrontation one on one or vice
Right.
versa. I know some people that thrive in, I want to have the difficult discussion in front of others, and others are like, if we're one on one, I want to feel like we're closer friends. So be in agreement with
Ah,
me then. And so I think that's the bigger thing is that people have different PTSD and scars. And so how you show up is going to change. I'm often coaching just a single CEO or a C-suite as they're trying to get through that 10 to $20 million inflection point kind of thing. And different than you in how I approach that. Because like for me, it's usually just how are they showing up to other people on their teams that's holding that back, as opposed to questioning how their team's growing in that larger leadership style.
yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to me. It's an interesting way to think about it. We trigger PTSD in our team sometimes, right? In the individuals in our team, and they may do the same, right, to us. It's really interesting because literally just yesterday, my assistant was actually signing us up for me to be a guest on a podcast. And
Okay.
one of the questions they wanted me to answer was, what's your biggest leadership challenge? And I took it actually as an opportunity to
Mm,
have a conversation with my assistant about how I show up for her.
okay.
And it was really interesting because I know myself, like I take the world in emotionally. That's just how I process things. And I've really had to work very hard at understanding that and the impact that has on me and the people around me. She is one of the most practical, like task oriented, not that she's not emotional, but she just doesn't have that experience, which on the one hand is very good, right? That we've got the yin yang thing going on, because I think it's really helpful. But what I would sometimes think would be a little too much, a little harsh, whatever, a little too direct. She's like, no, I need you to be direct with me. It was really a very interesting conversation. But I think you're exactly right about that. And I think just understanding that and then having conversations. I think that's the other thing is that we don't talk about this stuff.
Yeah, in some cases we don't talk about it. In other cases, people may not necessarily realize it themselves. In that, like, if you
Right.
think about the PTSD or different bosses people worked from, unless somebody's like 22 and you're their first person and you're the just stellar boss, we've all worked for that company where they say things on the website. They say they want to hear criticism. They say they want to hear bad things go on. but then the exact opposite. And so knowing that, either if they're practical or emotional, you still have to realize that from a habit perspective, yes, do I need to share what the big vision for the company is? Yes. And do people want to hear positive things that are going well? Yes. But what they actually need to hear if you want them to show up differently is they need to hear you talk about here's specific decisions. Some cases in my back past, if I don't have anything new, but especially recently, that I wish I would have handled differently one on one, or data that I missed, or here's something that we're adjusting course. And yes, we looking back, we could have known that we were making a bad decision, but we made what we thought was a good one, and now we've reevaluated stuff. And unless you actually are taking the time to walk through that, people don't believe you. And
Yeah.
so, like from an action perspective, a habit perspective, you do have to dwell on some of those things that, hey, I wish we would have done this differently. Here's a bad decision and the thought process through that so that people will come to you with gut feelings or bad data or customer feedback so that
Right.
things could change over time.
I agree. And I would say as well that the other piece of this, and I'm so adamant about this, which is that nobody on your team should ever be surprised about what is on their performance evaluation.
Right.
Like it's the same thing. It's that constant feedback loop. If you, as a leader and as a manager of people, one of your, yes, you have to, like you said, people have to perform to business outcomes, 100%. But also, one of your jobs as a manager is to also grow the career of your team members. And so, if you are not giving them feedback on some sort of regular cadence, then you're really robbing them of their career development. And to then once a year give them feedback, especially if it's negative feedback where they've not had a chance to grow or correct it or do something different. Frankly, I'm just going to say people may not agree with me, but I think that's a leadership, not a team member error.
Absolutely. Because if somebody's not hitting the expectations that you have, it could be uncommunicated expectations. You may have poor expectations. What you have may not be realistic, or they just don't understand the outcomes that you're trying to reach. And you, to the point again about hiring people for jobs or actions, no, you're wanting the outcome. And so, yeah, maybe they're not sending the emails the way you want or the social media the way you want, but they've realized there's a better way to reach the outcome. But if you're not having that discussion, like there's no way to work through what that should look like.
Exactly. And I think the other thing that's so interesting, I think, about what you're saying is that we so often, as leaders and managers, get very caught up in this is the way you send an email, this is the
Right.
way you do this. And so, even if they're getting the outcome, but they're not doing it the same way, we get very caught in you have to put the dishes in the dishwasher in a particular way. I remember this was a long time ago. It's very funny that I remember this, that I was in a sorority in college and I lived in the sorority house. And I remember at one of the meetings, somebody was complaining and like really passionately complaining about how people were wiping their hands on the dish towel that was meant to dry dishes. I was sitting there just fascinated because I was like, who knew? Who knew that was a rule? Like,
Right.
I never heard of that in my entire life. But like for her, it was just like, that's how it's done. You have a hand towel and you have a dish towel. And then, like, when she said it, I was like, oh, that's so interesting, right? Like, maybe that is a good idea. But it's not a rule I knew. Certainly wasn't a rule I had in my house.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, that's part of just having open conversation and having time for people to both surface things and surface it in a way that it's like, hey, this isn't necessarily going to risk our job relationship, our performance, or anything. But that does take training on both sides. Like, I want people to surface things, but also depending on how they've been raised, the companies they've worked at, people may not surface things in an ideal way. And
Right.
so it's one of the things where it's like, I do being able to use the wording that comes back and say, that seemed very strong. That seems like this is very important to you. I don't understand why this is such a big deal to you, but I want to understand. That gives
Right.
somebody the ability to go, it's actually not that big of a deal. It just came across that way, or it is a big deal, and let me explain to you why.
I like the way that you said that. The other way that I like to phrase that is my experience of that was that this is very important to you, or that
Right.
came across really strongly. And I want to understand why. Because I always think you're not saying like you did something wrong. You're just saying
Right.
this is what my experience. You're just owning your own experience of it. And then you can also open up a discussion that way.
Yeah, no, I love that. And depending how strong it is, if somebody I feel is really harsh with how they've come out, I'll often just put that as, did you mean for that to sound like overly confrontational and degrading?
Yeah.
Because it gives them the moment to say, no, that's not at all how I intended that to come across.
Right.
Or for them to pause and go, actually, I did intend for it to come across that way, but this isn't going to be good. I need to restate that in a slightly different way. And so by all
Right.
means, like the stronger it is, I may push that back that much stronger with the wording
Right.
perspective.
Yeah, good for you for actually, I guess on this podcast, I'm trying not to swear, but I probably would. Did you really mean to come across as an a-hole? Or, okay, I would not say that in a meeting. All right, just saying. All right. Okay, last question for you. It's a two-parter. Okay. And I think really clearly you are an experienced leader. You've obviously had success. When imposter syndrome comes up for you, right? That lack of confidence or that twinge of discomfort. Two parts. One, what's the circumstance where it's likely to come up for you? And two, what do you do to get yourself either back to center or moving forward?
Yeah, great question. The first thing I usually do is remind myself that everyone experiences it. And when I look back with either people I've coached or people I've been in peer groups with, it's almost more so those people who claim that they don't have imposter syndrome. You can look back at these massive swings that have happened in their life where no, they have had it. And it comes up where they've hit burnout or there's been some major like catastrophic thing that's happened where they still may not have realized that it was imposter syndrome, but it caused them to act in a bunch of ways where they were either compensating for it. And so I remind myself of that first of all. And that does tend to help. Even more so nowadays, where it's especially the more, to your point about what triggers it, like the more things that I do where my pace outruns my time to reflect on how I'm feeling and what's going on,
Mm,
or that I'm consuming too much external noise. Like my wife and I will go somewhere between 75 and 150 books each every year, in addition to podcasts and other curriculum that we're going through. And so that 2x, 3x speed. So you're consuming all of this information, and a lot of it's like a hype cycle. Somebody that's claiming I'm doing this with AI, I'm doing this thing. And when if you look under the hood, as thanks to some of my peer groups, I see like, yeah, you saying this on a podcast, you're saying this is your outcomes, but you actually have 30 people behind it doing manual stuff on top of that. And that's how it shows up for me. If either I'm not pausing to reflect or I'm just consuming too much information without being able to, again, have that reflection time to pause and think about it and go, okay, some of that may be unrealistic. And so that would be my answer to your first question. The second part is like, how do I manage that? The first thing for me is I've been very intentional in having peer relationships around me. That so I'm on the board and part of a almost 30-year organization called CEO Netweavers, all senior leaders at very established companies. And it's very different than being like in a Vistage or something else or having an executive coach where like these are other peers. I'm with CFOs and CMOs and some CEOs, and we're very transparent to the point like some cases, here's my P&L, or I'm going to go ask my board for an extra $10 million. And can you all just weigh back into it? And being very transparent about both fears and getting criticism. I'd rather have that from those people that don't control my paycheck sometimes. And so those relationships are very helpful for me. And the second thing about how I manage it is really just making sure that I have a long-term family vision, both for what I'm wanting out of our family, but also where we're agreed upon we would like my career to go going forward. Because at the end of the day, like any of us that have been successful, we have a ton of things. And so you're going to make excuses to either like you're going to fail on, or you're going to make excuses to the way I like to view it is what's my best yes. And so I have to have those transparent peer groups around that are at the same rough level that can speak in truth to me, that sometimes good, sometimes bad, and then to allow me to help make that best yes decision.
I love that. The best yes. Yeah, that really resonates with me. I like that. I like the way you phrase that, the best yes, because I have a tendency to say yes to everything. And I'm definitely at the point of getting to the priority, really the best yes. What are really the priorities here? And what is really going to not just move the business forward, but also fill my cup?
Yeah,
And I think sometimes I really am at the point where I'm pretty uninterested in moving the business forward without having the this is challenging and I like this.
right.
I think I had a client early on in my coaching career that I like to call her the gift that keeps on giving. Client that you're like, I know that she's not a good fit for me, but she's willing to pay me. So I will take her on. And I also was in a peer group, and everybody was like, oh my God, Kim, she needs coaching. And it was the biggest disaster that I have ever had in my career. And so I just like to say thank you because it's really saved me a lot of grief moving forward.
Right. Yeah, that ability to know what's best for you does require you having a plan for what's long term, knowing what's going to be your best yes. And so, one of the ways that examples I give sometimes is I still do keynote speaking, I still do corporate speaking as well. And I could do it full time. A great high six figure, seven figure, just doing speaking. But that's not what my wife and I want to be on the road for the 200 to 230 days a year that it would take doing that. But I still do public speaking. And so, having been a member of National Speakers Association, I might compare, okay, like a low six figure speaking fee or speaking revenue over the year. And I compare that to people who, in some cases, they're better speakers, some cases they're not. And they're doing like 10x and 50x the revenue I'm doing. Well, that's okay because my wife and I have decided I can do X number of virtual events a year and 3 to 5 in person. And it's fine that if we're not earning the revenue of someone else, because it's both something I do enjoy doing. We still get to grow things that way, but you can't do that comparison. And it's the best yes, because we've decided where it fits into our strategy for a family and for my career.
Yeah, I love that. And I will say that my husband, I have a speaking gig in New Orleans and he's gonna hop along with me. So that'll be super fun. But yeah, agree. I think you have to make chasing only money is not necessarily the right decision.
And
Yeah.
that's what I think that so much of imposter syndrome comes to is there's always things that you can improve in any aspect of your life. And so if you have not thought through both what do you actually want in a medium and longer term, then you're going to feel like you're failing at some or all things. And so
Right.
another example is I had a chief operating officer that worked for me, and we're out for lunch one day right after we started working together. And I just kind of asked, what's your personal mission? What do you want out of life? You look back at me like, this was a good life. And he said, my mission is to be happy. That's my mission. And I was like, okay. And I knew he's married. And I was like, so can I ask you a few more questions? And he said, sure. And I said, do you want to be like maximally happy today, this week, this month, this year, 10 years, 20 years? And he was like, why do you ask? And I was like, I've met your wife and I know where you're at career wise. And if I was trying to maximize being happy this week, maybe I don't pay my mortgage or this month or this year or 10 years. Like what I would be choosing to be happy with at any one time might be contrary to if I was trying to be maximally happy over my whole life over 10 years. And is that with my wife and not? And he paused and we had a conversation back and forth and he's like, I don't know. And so that was the conversation over the next 2 years where we actually sold the company a year later. And he just kept grabbing time with me because he was struggling with thinking through. And would he have reached imposter syndrome or burnout at some point? I don't know. But in his mind, he had nailed his personal mission, but he had never thought through. Yes, and in his case, he wanted to be happy with his wife over the long term. And what did that look like? Now, there was a lot of different things, personal and work wise, in there. But in his mind, he actually had fallen into, hey, when I'm 90 and I'm looking back, I want to have been, say, I've had a good, happy life, even if I wasn't happy for this 5 year period of my life. And I was like, I'm so thankful that you figured that out because, like, I didn't know, and that could be really bad. And that's where imposter syndrome comes to. I want to be the best public speaker. I want to make the most money. I want to earn the most. I want to be happiest with my kids. All of those things are going to compete with each other. And if you have not thought through both what do you want and what am I going to give up to get that, you're
Right.
going to feel like you're an imposter and you're a failure.
Yeah. Oh my God. That is just mic drop. Okay. That is a perfect place for us, I think, to end. I've got nothing here. That was just so beautifully said. Kurt, thank you so much for really just coming and just giving so much to this conversation. Really appreciate it. Kurt's info will be in the show notes, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to my newsletter, which we put out once a week, and it's always meant to be helpful, and it gives you a little thing to do, right? A little practice, because that's always a good thing. And that will be in the show notes. And thank you for listening. Also, share, download, all the things. So, this is Kim Miller-Hershon, Kim Miller-Hershon Coaching and Consulting. You've been listening to Unconventional Wisdom about conventional wisdom with my guest today, Kurt Uhlir. And we will see you next time. Go out there and be a better human.
Where cliches come to retire.